Executive Director of American Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your moderator today. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today for our webinar called Slovakia Tiger Again or Lagging Behind. It's my pleasure to welcome Ivan Mikloš, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Slovakia, who will be our speaker today. Before we start, I would like to share with you the housekeeping rules. Please turn off your microphones and cameras. You are allowed to ask questions. Actually, we are very much interested in your questions. Please prepare them for the later discussion, or you can share your questions also with us by writing and using a feature of WebEx, which allows you to send your questions to the speaker and to the audience via our discussion. Mr. Mikloš will have a presentation or speech approximately half an hour, and then we will have more than or approximately 1 hour to discuss your questions. Of course, I have a couple of questions, but you are very much encouraged to ask your questions because I'm sure that all of you are very much interested in the current crisis view of Mr. Mikloš, as well as the future development and what Slovakia should do in order to stay competitive in the future. We will touch a couple of very interesting topics, so I'm sure that we will have a great debate. Before I pass over the word to Mr. Mikloš, I would like to start also with a very interesting quote from President of Ghana, which I found on the net, and he said on the March 26th, "We know what to do to bring back our economy back to life. What we do not know how to do is to bring people back to life." Mr. Mikloš, do you agree? At least with the first part of the statement. Do we know how to bring back our economy to life? The floor is yours.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me for this event. I'm not sure if we know how to bring economy back. At least if you're speaking about to bring economy back on the same track or comparable track as it was before Corona crisis. Because I'm afraid or I'm convinced that economy will work differently after this crisis. That globalization will be not the same. And we can see it also if we compare economic development after global financial and economic crisis in 2008-2009, that then period, 10 years, was different than before. And I think that also after Corona crisis era will be different as it was before. Which means there is a very, very challenging problem, not only crisis itself, not only from the medical point of view, but also from economic point of view. Let me start firstly by speaking about the global economic situations, and then I will turn to Europe, European Union, Eurozone, and Slovak conditions. Firstly, important is to notice that even economic development before Corona crisis was generally considered as vulnerable, and it was more or less consensus that it is only a question when crisis will come, not if crisis will come. It was a long time not economic growth, which was slower than before global financial and economic crisis. But the main problem was that this growth was fueled by even quicker growing of debt, global debt. And this is clear that this kind of model is not sustainable for a long time. Just for illustration, the global debt between 2009-2019 increased by $70 trillion and reached $255 trillion in the end of 2019. Just for imagine what is the size of this, it is 200 90% of global GDP. Of course, we are speaking about overall debt, public debt and private debt, corporate debt overall. But still, it is a very, very, very high number, and there are doubts if this model of development is sustainable. The biggest problem was that what was correct policy of the central banks and governments during crisis. Now I'm speaking about global financial crisis in 2008 and global economic crisis 2009. It is generally considered that this reaction of the governments and central banks at that time was correct, which means fiscal expansion and especially monetary expansion to avoid freezing of the financial flows at that time and to avoid very, very deep recession. This policy and this reaction was very good, very correct, but the problem was that this kind of policy continued also after this crisis, which means we had decades of monetary expansion, quantitative easing, very low, close to zero, even sometimes minus interest rates, which was, I am afraid, not correct policy, because what happened, it was illusion that this kind of policy will start and support high economic growth. But finally, it was not true. The growth was lower than before global financial crisis, and growth was lower than growth of debt. And this is very, very important. The comparison between debt growth and economic growth. And another problem was that this kind of policy created. Okay, firstly, why it was not reflected, this policy, in the higher economic growth? Mainly because this money stayed in financial system, and what was fueled more than growth was growth of price of assets, shares, bonds, and real estate. Mainly because the main reason was, in my opinion, that economic actors, which means companies and inhabitants, felt that this kind of development is unsustainable, and despite of a lot of cheap money, it didn't increase investment and consumption. Another reason was that this money finished at the financial system, and they only part of them have been channeling to consumers and companies. And the problem of this kind of economic model is that if you are fueling, if you are giving the economy too much cheap money, then what is missing is Schumpeter's creative destruction. What is missing is that you are sustaining in the market not only illiquid companies, which are healthy, but if they have problem with liquidity, they can collapse. But you are supporting also insolvent companies, which are simply not competitive, and companies and part of economy which in normal circumstances could be left from the economy and could free the sources for the new companies, more competitive companies, more innovative companies, and so on. Which means we are then in kind of vicious cycle of the lower growth, lower competitiveness, and sustaining on the market also uncompetitive subjects. Then another problem is that, of course, it is creating very soft conditions for governments. It is not pushing governments for the necessary structural reforms because they have enough cheap money for covering all debts by new and even increase indebtedness for the future. Another problem of this kind of economic model is increasing of income disparities, because of course what is growing in value are assets, shares, bonds, and which are owned by rich people and elder people, which means it is creating also pressure between generations. It is creating it is increasing pressure between poor and rich, and then it has also negative potential consequences for the sustainability of the system of the liberal democracy, and this is one of the reasons for increase of the influence of the extreme politicians, political movements, and so on and so on. I think this is very important to understand this before we start evaluating and assessing what happened now. Because what happened now is unprecedented crisis, which is simply locking down of the significant part of global economy. And the difference now is that global financial economic crisis was mostly caused by demand shock. Now we have both and supply shock. This is very important to understand. Another difference is the speed of the problem, speed of the crisis. Just again for illustration, when global financial crisis started, it took almost 2 years, 2.5 years from the slowing down and decreasing of the real estate price. Case-Shiller index, which is measuring this, was stopped and then decreased from July 2006. And then it took 2.5 years until financial crisis after Lehman Brothers collapse was visible and started in full. Now it was just few weeks after the virus started to be widespread in China, then in Europe, in US, and so on. Demand shock and supply shock. This is very important because the reason why it was not the main reason why it was not high inflation after 2008-2009 was because it was caused only by demand shock, by freezing of the flows, financial flows in the economy. Now we have also supply shock because the many companies, firstly in China, then in Europe, in the US, has to be closed, which means chains, these trade chains and goods and services chains have been stopped, and also production, also supply is much lower. Then after supply shock, a demand shock came because of course people are afraid to spend money. Many of them have income. Even those who have, they are postponing their investment or purchase of some items and so on and so on. Now we are in global crisis, and today it is about 93% of global population is under some conditions of the restrictions. More than 100 countries asked International Monetary Fund for help, for credit, which means it is really very quick and very global crisis. Now, the problem, what we will face after this crisis, and I will not speak about this medical part of the crisis, what kind of strategy is better or worse. What is important, I think, is that we don't know. Now we don't know which strategy is the best. We will know it only after this crisis will be overcome, after we will be able to compare different countries at different periods also. Now we don't know. And this is one of the reasons why this crisis is so difficult. Because if you have bad situations that you know when this situation will be finished, will end, then you can prepare strategies. But if you don't know when it will be finished, then it is much more difficult. What we can say now is, from this point of view, that it will be much more difficult as global financial and economic crisis 2008-2009. In comparison of Slovakia, for instance, our economy decreased in 2009 by 5%. It was only 1 year decrease. Now it is clear, in my opinion, that it will be a two-digit number, at least 10% of GDP decrease. Another problem is that, of course, even before crisis, we had this problem of debt growing quicker than economy. Now we will have another big burden of new debt, which we will use for overcoming or decreasing the negative consequences of this crisis. And now, and nobody knows it, but there is more and more economists are afraid that now we can face, after this crisis, we can face also the risk of inflation. And this is the question. But if there will be now, why this time situation could be different? Firstly, because now money are going not only to the financial system but to the people. Another difference is that now it is not only demand shock but also supply shock. If it will be much more money among people and lower supply of goods and services, then of course it can create problem of inflation. If inflation will be higher, on one side, inflation can be strategy how to solve indebtedness, which means how to decrease part of the debt. But at the same time, if inflation will grow, it will be necessary to have higher interest rates, of course. If you want to have a real interest rate, it has to be higher than inflation. And then, of course, it will be problem how to return this debt. Because if interest rates are close to zero or minus, then it is very easy to cover all debts by new debt and also to increase indebtedness. But if interest rates are much higher and global indebtedness is 290% of global GDP, then it could be much more difficult. Another interesting figure in this regard is that before this crisis, which means in 2019, by IMF figures, about 40% of corporate debt in the major advanced economies were at risk of default. Which means if 40% of in the richest countries in the world, if 40% of corporate debt was at risk of default before this crisis, what will be the proportion of the risk of default after this crisis, when many of companies are going through the serious problems? Which means, let me conclude by saying that what we only know that this new situation will be extremely difficult, and maybe it will be connected with some new problems and challenges which we didn't face during the last 10 years. Now, Europe and Slovakia. Another problem connected with this is that Eurozone will face, and this is almost 100% sure, that after overcoming this acute stage of this crisis, Eurozone will face very serious challenge. Simply saying, it will be necessity to have much more solidarity, much more transfers to avoid severe financial crisis in Italy, in southern Europe, but mainly in Italy and Spain. Because Italy and Spain are the mostly affected by crisis, and at the same time indebtedness of Italy, and especially Italy, is very high, and without having, for instance, corona bonds or other methods of the sharing cost of this, it couldn't be possible for Italy to avoid deep financial crisis, because spreads will simply increase, and if Italian spreads will be increased, then it will be impossible for Italy to sustain financially. Now, problem of course is that it is politically very sensitive for northern countries, especially for Germany and Netherlands. And problem is how to solve this. The problem is, and this is the main problem. Main problem is not indebtedness. Main problem in definition of the Eurozone is that if there are big differences, and what is even more important, if there are increasing differences in the competitiveness among Eurozone members, then euro cannot be sustained. And the problem is, and this is the problem, that competitiveness of southern countries, especially Greece, France, and Italy, is growing much, much slower than competitiveness of north countries, for instance, Germany or Netherlands, but also other countries. And as this gap is increasing, it is creating the problem because for the less competitive countries, euro is too strong. It is decreasing their export ability. It is increasing then another disbalances, macro disbalances, and so on. And of course, you can, from short-term perspective, you can solve this by transfers from the more competitive countries. But of course, it is politically unsustainable. Main reason is that political legitimacy or identity, European identity, common European identity, is not strong enough to legitimize this expenditure or these transfers from the one country to another. It was strong national, still it is national identity is much stronger than common European identity. It was the reason why it was politically possible to have this kind of transfers from Western Germany to Eastern Germany. But to have it among Eurozone countries is politically simply impossible. Which means it will be necessary now to, after this crisis, to have some solution on this. In my opinion, it has to be a kind of combination of transfers of solidarity, for instance, through Corona bonds, but also, and what is missing still, is to have some rule of the game which will push or enforce the less competitive countries to do necessary structural reforms to increase their competitiveness. And in my opinion, and this is not what I'm saying only now, I'm saying this years, that I'm convinced that without having exit rule in Eurozone, it couldn't be possible. Which means it will be necessary to have, but very strict exit rule. Maybe in discussion I can explain how it can work, because it is impossible to push artificially politicians or voters in southern countries. You have to do reforms. No, but it is necessary to have a rule that it will be clear for voters and for politicians that we have to choose. We have to choose. We have the choice between doing what is necessary precondition for sustaining it in Eurozone and doing reforms, or not to doing it. It is our decision, but then we have to know that we will have to leave Eurozone. And finally, it will be better also for them because the currency, own currency, will allow them to solve this balance, which is legitimate now. Now Slovakia. Slovakian problem is that we lost time. We lost a lot of time, a long time, and a lot of money between 2006 and today, because the government of Smer didn't do any reforms. On the contrary, they reformed what was done before. They didn't use these good times, and Slovakia had really good economic times. We had, when global financial and economic crisis came, then Radičova's government, which was in power 2 years, had to solve the consequences and decrease deficits and so on. Which means Fico and his government, Pellegrini's government, have been running the country in good times. Unfortunately, the situation in competitiveness was only worsening. If we speak, but I don't want to go in details. What is the most important? The most important is that the model, economic model in Slovakia is based on mass industrial production, especially automobiles, but not only. And this was done, this high competitiveness in this area was done mainly by our membership in the Eurozone, European Union, Eurozone, and reforms which were done during those two governments. But then the problem was that from 2006, we didn't use this, and on basis of this, we had high economic growth, very high growth of the public incomes, and so on. But that time was not used for restructuring our economy, for improve our competitiveness, for improve business environment, for improve efficiency of the public service, or for improve law enforcement. for improved education, science, research, and so on, to create preconditions for restructuring economy from this mass industrial production to more innovation-driven economy based on more sophisticated production services with higher value added and so on, so on. And then, and this is if you look at any ranking, if it is global World Economic Forum, Global Competitiveness Index, if there is a corporate governance index, human index, and so on. Slovakian problem was that we achieved significant positive result in economic convergence thanks to reforms which have been done many years before. But if you compare not only this economic convergence but also social convergence, measuring, for instance, by Human Development Index, and governance conversion, then you can see that in comparison with other countries like especially Estonia or Czech Republic, that in these other convergences we are much worse. If you compare quality of public services like healthcare, if you compare education, PISA, so on, it is more and more lagging behind the comparable countries. Which means now situation will be very challenging for the new government. Because new government, firstly, it is a fortune for Slovakia that we had this change of the government, because we can say surely that it was impossible to expect from the Smer government that they will start to behave more responsibly and more professionally, and they will start necessary reforms. One of the problems, of course, is corruption, cronyism, and so on and so on. Which means new government is very good news for Slovakia. But if you look at program declaration, at how government is managed, of course there are some big challenges, especially regarding program of the government. I mean, program is good and correct from point of view what is written there. Especially if you are speaking about economy, you are speaking about what is written in the program in area of public finance, in area of business environment, which means areas which are managed by Minister of Finance and Minister of Economy are really good. It is nice to read it. Everything is correct there. I have no objection what is written there. The problem is that if you read everything, then you can see that there is contradiction between the commitments of the Ministry of Finance and Public Finance chapter of the declaration and the demands from the other chapters for public money, promises which are there, what everything the government will improve, will create, and so on. Which means it is. I wrote somewhere that even if we don't have corona crisis here and economic crisis connected with this, even if we have a lot of reserves from the past, this kind of government declaration couldn't be realized because it is very demanded for public money. This is one problem. Another problem in this program declaration, which is connected with this public finance sustainability, is that just in a few chapters of this program declaration, I have seen a kind of effort or ways how not only ask for more money, but also how ministers and ministries want to increase efficiency of their operation. It is very nicely written, but it is more exception as rule in the Foreign Affairs Ministry chapter, where they wrote very correctly and very responsibly that there is a lack of money in the resort, but they know it is reality, and they want to increase efficiency by reassessment of the network of the embassies it is good approach, but unfortunately, majority of other chapters are only asking for we have to do this, we have to do this, we will do, we promise to do, and then is not covered by money. This is especially this will be problem in healthcare and in education. We all know that in education we need the real change. We all know that it will be difficult. We all know that there are no quick wins in this, and the real result will come later. But now it is necessary to have effort, to have money, and so on and so on. And because we will have a lack of money, and we will have lack of money, because if we will have a recession about 10% of GDP, if we lose a lot of money on income, and if we will have to spend much more money on expenditure side, of course it will be severe lack of money. At the same time, we know that to improve situation in education, one of the preconditions, only one of the preconditions, but without this it is very difficult to do anything, is also to invest more money in this system. And what is missing for me, for instance, in program declaration, is that we know by international comparisons that we are giving in some areas more money, in some areas less money than comparable countries. And exactly this is about healthcare versus education. We are giving at least the same or even more money to healthcare as comparable countries, as share of our public expenditure or as share of GDP, but we are giving much less money to education. We are giving more money to public administration, to bureaucrats. We are giving much more money to economy, to support economic subjects. But in program declaration, I haven't seen any proposals or program how to increase efficiency and decrease, for instance, expenditures in these areas where we are giving more and where efficiency is very, very low. Which means it will be necessary in these new conditions, which will be more difficult, to have really deep structural reforms and to have reforms for saving more money and using money much more effective. Because if we compare, and I will conclude by saying this, if I compare this program declaration, if I compare it on one side measures which are increasing deficit, and on other side measures which are decreasing deficit, it is much which are increasing public expenditures or decreasing public revenues. These kind of measures are much more prevailing. These measures which are increasing public income or decreasing public expenditures. There is only and of course we all know that there is a lot of tax areas in VAT, for instance. There is huge corruption. Corruption can bring something. But we know, and even correctly it is written in program declaration, that this income will be not such big and not immediate. It will take time to increase incomes from this. And at the same time, what is only written in program declaration and correctly written, that government doesn't want to increase tax burden, which means if some taxes will be increased, other taxes have to be decreased. And only taxes which are declared that it will be increased are the property taxes, which is correct, there is space, and then some taxes from negative externalities, which is again correct, but this will increase something that if we don't want increased tax burden, we will have to reduce some of that. Another good illustration how this balance is the program from point of view of promises and money available is that I counted more than 200 promises in the program declaration which are increasing deficit, especially by increasing expenditures, but just few those which are decreasing deficit. And again, for illustration, I counted there 17 new central bodies, central institutions or central offices, which are promised to be created. But on the other side, institutions, I found only some kind of considering to joining in two cases, two offices in one, but just considering, not promise that they will do it. Which means finally, I think the government will be confronted with reality. We don't know how severe reality on the recession, lack of money, necessity to take new loans and credits, and how to cover this. But it seems to me that then it will be very, very important how to solve this without because there are very, very high expectations from the new government, from the program of the new government. Situation will be, I'm afraid, much more complicated. And one of the problems which can be connected with this, that if you are creating too high expectations, then it is impossible to fulfill these expectations. It can bring even more difficult and risky situation from point of view of the growth of popularity of extremists and populists and so on. Yeah, this is the picture is maybe not very nice, but it will be the reality not only in Slovakia but also in other countries. In Slovak case, unfortunately, we will have to pay the price for wasting years from 2006 until now. Good years which haven't been used for creating some reserves, for covering, for instance, costs for now, for doing necessary changes, necessary reforms. And of course, the government will be confronted, especially this more populist part of the government, which means the two biggest political parties of the coalition, with their promises and with their ability to fulfill these promises. And another challenge seems to be how the prime minister will be able to manage the coalition government, because it is not easy. Every coalition government is a very strange animal, where at the same time competitors and cooperators have to work together, and to manage this even in good times is terrible challenge. To manage this in time of crisis and all this legacy will be even much more difficult. But good news is that majority of ministers seems to be very competent people. They are hiring good professionals. We have strong capacity in these institutions at the ministries, like value for money, fiscal policy, and other these kind of institutions at the some key ministries. Okay, it was from my side at the beginning. Then now we can start discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mikloš, for very realistic assessment of the global, European, and local environment, and thank you for sharing your observations. I think they were very, very interesting. Let's go to questions. I would like to start with some of the points which you touched. As we are mostly among business community, we have a couple of people from embassies as well as other institutions, but I'm sure that most of the people who are listening to your observations are curious, like where it's going to be, the light at the end of the tunnel. Not only when, but where. I would say you mentioned that, all the money, all the credit created ended up mostly in the financial sector. and there was a lack of these Schumpeter's creative destruction. Isn't this crisis an opportunity to transform our economies? And where do you see this new engine of growth could come from?
Yeah, every crisis is creating opportunity. That's true. I think where is and when it will be light at the end of this tunnel. I think important is that economies cannot survive longer lockdown than 2-3 months, which means good is that finally we will have to live together with this coronavirus at least until there will be vaccine. And we know that it will be not such soon. Maybe it will take 1 year, maybe even more, which means it's coming from this understanding. Because at the beginning it was kind of quickly spread fear, and it is normal. It's very emotional. People are dying in the media everywhere and so on. Now I think it is good news that it is broad understanding that it is impossible first to solve the virus and then to open countries and open economies. Which means good news is that the most countries are returning to the, I'm not saying normal life because it will be of course different than it was before, but opening the economy. Another good news maybe is that usually it is possible to say that politicians, especially in democracies, are doing what is necessary and reasonable only after trying to use everything else. Which means now maybe it will be another incentive for solving the problem. For instance, I mentioned this Eurozone crisis, which the missing of the rules of the exit was, in my opinion, one of the reasons why we just pushed everything in front of us and didn't solve. Now that it will be necessity to solve this. Also, regarding these more reforms, it was not sufficient understanding that there is no free lunch. Maybe it will be clear now that there is no free lunch, and without increasing competitiveness, which means without doing necessary reforms, it will be simply impossible to survive. Which means if this will bring to change, because our development was unsustainable, because it was based on and of course we can speak about sustainability not only from economic point of view, we can speak about sustainability from the environment point of view, climate changes and all these matters. I'm not sure if it will be used on this, but seems to be that also globalization. If we speak about how globalization worked before, how irresponsible we were in creating preconditions for facing this kind of crisis. What I'm afraid is that we will have to accept. I mean, all world we have to accept that this kind of growth which we had before is unsustainable. It will mean maybe that because if you have lower growth, you have of course lower increase of living standard, quality of life, and so on and so on. And biggest challenge which I see here is that how to overcome this with avoid to destroying the system. I mean destroying the system of liberal democracy. Because if our model of the operation will be not changed, it can bring again even much higher income disparity. We see now that the most vulnerable are that even today's consequences of the crisis are even increasing the income disparities. And how to connect necessity to be competitive, to be more competitive, to sustain economic freedom, free and fair competition. Because free and fair competition is the only real engine of the growth, of the competitiveness, and so on. And how to reconnect this necessity of the free and fair competition with the social and political sustainability of the system, and finally also environment sustainability. Which means this and how to strengthen in some respect the global solutions, because we are facing global problems, and still global competencies of the global institutions are not strong enough. Speaking about Europe, it will be clear that it will increase necessity, firstly, to have clear rules in Eurozone, for instance, but not only. Also, how to strengthen the competency of the European Union, at least in area like national affairs and safety, which means defense as well. Because it seems to be that this kind of tensions, geopolitical tensions between China, especially China and the Western, will be increased. Which means a lot of challenges which will need new solutions. But what I'm afraid that because I'm afraid that this crisis will strengthen the role of governments, and it's clear in every this kind of situation, war or this kind of global pandemic and crisis, the position of government is strengthened. And then it will be very important to not misuse this and to return to the normality, which doesn't mean to return what we had before. This is the biggest challenge. But nobody knows. Nobody knows exactly about when and where light at the end of the tunnel will appear.
Okay, thank you. The title of our webinar is Tiger again or lagging behind, so it should focus on Slovakia. But before we go really in more detail about what Slovakia should do and what are your recommendations, how would you see the situation in Europe? And you touched it already a couple of times. You mentioned Eurozone developments. Just yesterday, Fitch rating agency downgraded Italian debt to just one notch above bank. I don't really know what is Europe going to do about this situation. Do you think that ECB and the European Commission are doing enough to alleviate the crisis in Europe in general and in Southern Europe in particular, or you think that more should be done? And at the same time, what is your view on coordination of all the actions between heads of national governments? Is there is this communication and actually steps taken going in the right direction, or you see only national responses?
Yeah, short answer could be that more should be done, but Brussels and ECB cannot do much more. This is the point. Which means because sometimes we expect from Brussels, from European Commission, European Union, and ECB more than they can do. It is necessary to point that European Union budget is only about 1% European GDP, which is almost nothing. Which means it is incomparable are also competencies of the European Union. Which means still the problem is that in some areas, in general, European Union is not the United States of Europe like USA, which means we are not federal institution. The competencies on the European Union competencies are very, very limited. And at the same time, we expect that they will solve all our problems. What is problem that in some areas we came maybe too far, especially in monetary union. We have monetary union. Monetary union needs not only the common monetary policy and the central bank, but needs also common fiscal policy. We can have common fiscal policy, either through transfers or through structural reforms, which will decrease this gap in the company. Which means in some areas we have to, but it is impossible to return back by canceling Eurozone. course, the economic and political price of this could be unbelievable. Which means what is necessary to have more strict rules, which I already mentioned. Yeah. In some areas, we need to be more, and what is paradox, we still don't have a market in Europe. We still have a lot of exceptions and impediments for the single market in goods, in services, in financial area, and so on. Which we have to finalize a real single market. We have to have new rules for the areas and more integration, even more integration in foreign affairs, defense. As we had before, we have to have need reform of the European Union. Because the European Union, in spite of all problems and difficulties, is a unique project, especially for countries like Slovakia, like small open is fortune. If not, then our position could be much worse. But what is clear, and maybe this rising up business, we'll see. Okay, if we want to sustain eurozone, it is necessary to solve the problem. But solution is not only have corona bonds and to decrease spreads for Italy like this. The long-term and sustainable solution is to have the rules which will either sustain in the today's composition the eurozone, or it will sustain it, but with the price some countries will have to leave. There is no other solution, I'm afraid. And then we can speak also about strengthening European Union capacity by increasing budget. 1% of GDP is almost nothing if you compare what is the share of federal budget in the US is about 30%. What is the share of national budgets in the European Union? It's from 40% or 38% to 50%. Which means it is necessary to not only to ask for why EU is not doing more, but also to give EU and ECB more competences.
Okay, thank you. Coming to Slovakia, you said a couple of times that we are fortunate enough to have a new government. So far, they announced a couple of measures. Do you think that is the government doing enough or not enough? Are we overshooting or undershooting our capacity given our debt, total level of debt? You know, is the fiscal response so far adequate, or should it be bigger or smaller?
If it could be about 5% of GDP, it could be adequate, because unfortunately in our situation we have to be very careful to use more. I will explain why. The problem is that the speed and efficiency of this help is very, very, very insufficient. They spend just few million of euros. People and the entrepreneurs didn't receive money despite this 1 month from time when it was announced how they will receive it. Which means seems to be, and it's okay. Partly it is the price of the new government, who ministers came to the offices, but partly it is the vision that we can have this kind of focusing support, not kind of general support. But of course, that's if it is focused, it's also quick, but it is impossible. Even in case of more efficient government, it is illusion. Which means I will prefer much more automatic help based on demand. Then of course we can control. But it seems to be that now it is too bureaucratic that these papers are controlled bureaucratically and so on. If it will be enough, and why it is impossible to have, like in Germany will spend about 20% of GDP if we include also credit guarantees. But Germany has much better situation because Germany created reserves. Germany, but also Czech Republic, in the last years they had surplus budgets, which means they have accumulated money which they could use immediately. Because we still have deficit, we have to borrow this money. And for future, it is also very important because sometimes economists and politicians are saying, oh, our indebtedness is not so high, it is not such a big problem. But after crisis, it will be not about the level of indebtedness, it will be about how these countries will be assessed and considered by the creditors. And just for illustration, if we will, thanks to economic policy and reform especially, if we will be considered to be reliable better, then of course it is possible to have more debt and to take more credits now. But if not, then even lower level of indebtedness could create a lot of problems. Just for illustration, advanced countries has indebtedness about 100-105% of GDP. This public debt, yeah. But they are spending from 6 to 7% of the tax revenues paying interest rates of the debt. And in comparison, developing countries have only 1/3 of level of indebtedness, public indebtedness, from 30 to 40%. But they are spending from 17 to 22% of all tax revenues to paying interest of the public debt. Which means it is very, very important how, not only what will be the level of debt, because we cannot compare ourselves with Germany, but how we will be assessed and considered after crisis by our creditors. And it will depend again on reforms, on the reliability of the country, and so on.
So we come
That's also the reason why we cannot spend, I think, more than this 5%. But last point, it is important to spend it as soon as possible, to deliver this money as soon as possible. If it will come too late, it is for now.
Okay. So we come to this, like how the money should be spent and how should it be paid. But let me ask a different question. It seems like, okay, the current crisis is really, really terrible, but we know that we will have to go into big deficit and our debt will grow. Are you worried more about this debt generated by the crisis, or more about this long-term debt which is coming from deficits, permanent deficit in the healthcare as well as our pension system? So should we really focus our attention in the medium term on trying to tackle the debt generated by our pension system as well as the healthcare, or you would see different priorities?
I think both. It is impossible because it will be finally one that is, and again, only solution is that after crisis we will increase competitiveness, and then on basis of this we will achieve high and sustainable economic growth, and we will be able to have this sustainable indebtedness. Because only high, and this is important, only high and sustainable growth is a real solution for the overcoming this. High and sustainable growth is impossible to achieve without reforms, which means, again, we are in one cycle. Regarding including reforms, which are structural reforms, which are giving us possibility to overcome this vicious cycle of long-term indebtedness. Good example is the pension system. Yeah? Good news is that in this by a very strange way, it is written in the program declaration. Program declaration, government wrote that they want to do such changes in the pension system to increase pensions, which is maybe if you read only this, it is difficult to understand how it is possible. But it is written there also that they want to change the first pillar, which is pay-as-you-go system, to be sustainable in connection with the demographic development, which is good news. Which means there is commitment in the program declaration, simply saying implicitly it is written there that they will cancel this ceiling for the pension age, because ceiling for the pension age, which was approved by the constitutional law, which was supported also by Kolar's family, we are the family movement, is the biggest disaster for the long-term sustainability of public finance. And here is another very important point. Everybody will agree that, okay, without increasing competitiveness, we cannot be successful. Without the reforms, we cannot achieve competitiveness and growth. And part of this has to be macroeconomic stability. And significant part of macroeconomic stability are healthy, sound, and sustainable public finance. Sustainable, which means not only in the next few years, but in long-term sustainable public finance. And this is something which is such important that there are different opinions of different economists and analysts and experts, what is important, what is not important. But in this area, without having macroeconomic stability, sound and sustainable public finance, we can forget that we can be successful. Even Putin understood this. If you remember last year or 2 years ago, they increased pension age, despite it was very, very unpopular, because they knew that without this, it is impossible to sustain macroeconomic stability. Which means macro stability is one of the most important, but not sufficient precondition for being successful. And that's the reason why one of the biggest challenges of this program will be how after crisis to create or to restore fiscal sustainability, and at the same time to do necessary reforms, and at the same time fulfill what is written in this program, what everything they want to do for those. Possible, but impossible achieved with deep structural reforms in these sectors which are connected, as you asked, for instance, healthcare, for public administration, and so on.
You mentioned that macroeconomic stability is a prerequisite for future competitiveness, but it's not the only condition. Coming back to the government manifesto, does it address the risk coming from automation and robotization? So we want to be competitive in the medium and long term. Of course, the government manifesto is written only for 4 years, but there is a question from my colleague Petra Zapre. She's asking, like, what should Slovakia do in order to be competitive in 2030? So that means in 1 decade. What would be your recommendations for 5 key measures, systemic reforms, so that we know that in 10 years the world will move to a different stage, but Slovakia will be still competitive?
Yeah, I will say 4 areas. First one we have mentioned, I will not repeat: macro stabilization, sound and sustainable public finance. Second is improving business environment. In this area, in these 2 areas, I have to say that what is written in the program is good, is very good. It is written, these 2 chapters are written very good, but unfortunately, achieve this will not depend only on these 2 ministries, and without structural changes in other ministries, especially these big spending ministries, it will be impossible to achieve. But okay, there are 2: sound public finance, better business environment. Then third is effective and efficient public services and public administration. It means also all of this bureaucracy and courts and rule of law and so on. And fourth one is education, knowledge economy, research, science, a transfer of technologies, and everything connected with this. I mean, these 4 areas. If you look at these 4 areas, you can see that unfortunately during last 14 years, it was in all of them situation was either decreasing, worsening in this second, third, and fourth, and even in fiscal sustainability, it was relative progress, but very slow, insufficiently slow, and based on sometimes wrong policies, increasing taxes and payroll tax is not decreasing ineffective expenditures. Which means these 4 areas are necessary preconditions, but all of them have to be achieved. And then we have to have also some special programs, some special initiatives. For instance, how to support these new high-tech, innovative companies. How to simply saying support firstly by these general political changes or general reforms, which I have mentioned, these 4, and then also some specific. But very, very important is that I don't believe on such kind of explicit preferential policy that government will decide that we want to be better in this industry or this industry, and we will support specialties. It is way nowhere. And as an example, when I'm asked, for instance, in Ukraine, everybody thought in Ukraine that how number 1 in producing personal cars when we didn't produce personal cars 30 years ago. And everybody thought that we had some special program for this, that we decided at the government that we will be number 1, and we then had some specific measures for this. And I explained them, no. What we did systemic reforms, systemic general reforms by improving business environment for everybody, by a more flexible labor market for everybody, by decreasing tax burden for everybody, canceling dividend tax for everybody, and so on. And then it was the decision of those investors who came that result is that out of us are we are number 1 in the world. Which means the same logic has to be applied here, which again doesn't mean that it is not necessary to have some specific programs and incentives and conditions for instance, the transfer of technologies, for new technology, high technology companies, for startups and so on.
We at AmCham, we have already for some time, as one of our key priorities to make Slovakia an innovative economy. And you mentioned that during the last 15 years, really almost nothing was done in that respect. I remember your colleague Martin Brunsko was the head, of this initiative, Minerva program. Do we need something similar right now? And if yes, who should be in charge of it? Because, like in Slovakia, this is a really big problem that all these support schemes are very fragmented. The money which we receive from Brussels, these supportive schemes are going in very many different directions. I agree with you that it's difficult and it should be not really done only top down, that you decide like this is the industry which has the future, but still there should be some coordination. In your view, do we have a minister, or is there a ministry or any other institution within this state who should be in care or who should take care of this, or should we leave it, really as it is at the moment?
Yeah, definitely it needs the coordination. That was the reason why, because Minerva, as you have mentioned, we had even 2 Minerva programs. First one was when 2002-2006, when I was finance minister and deputy prime minister, and then second one was 2010-2012, when I was again in this position. And the reason why I took this was that I was also deputy prime minister, and I felt exactly what you explained now, that it was missing of the coordination, missing of the understanding how this knowledge economy is not only about the education, how it is connected with all the economy and all the government. The best solution could be if prime minister himself will cover this, will take responsibility for this, and I think it is time for this, because surely prime minister is the most influential person. Of course, his capacity is limited. He is responsible for everything, but this has to be priority. Without this, we cannot speak about how to solve this challenge. Another important issue is that we have to understand that even in situations which are very difficult by the shortage of money, of public money, we have to accept that despite of this difficult situation, education has to be, and education, research science, this has to be priority, which means, at least in relative terms, it will be also necessity to increase expenditures for this area, but not only money, of course, because I'm saying from the beginning that only give money to the poorly functioning, poorly working system is simply wasting of this money, which means connect the systemic changes and also more money.
When you said sorry about the money, I remember we had a conference about healthcare, and Ludo Odor was present, and he was saying that our healthcare is like a bucket with many holes, and we keep pouring water inside. And I think in some respect it's also, you know, in the education system that we know that more money should come, but there is so much inefficiency. Just coming back to what our members and our member companies think, we had more than half a year ago a cocktail, and we ran an opinion poll, and we asked the question, CEOs, what should be done as the top priority of the new government in order to improve competitiveness of Slovakia? 87% replied that serious education reform. But of course, you are heading MESA institution, and your colleague Renata Hall, together with her...
I cannot hear you.
Sorry.
Can you repeat? Can you...
Sorry. So we had CEO business cocktail, and we asked our member company CEOs what they think should be the most serious reform executed by the new government. And 87% replied that it should be serious education reform. And you have a logo of MESA just behind your back. I know that your team in MESA, headed by Renata Hall, they produce an excellent study, Toda Rozum. But of course, this is very important, but it's a long term. It's going to bring results maybe in 1 decade, if not more. What should be the top priority of the current Minister of Education? What do you think could bring some immediate or short-term results when the new minister takes his agenda really seriously and wants to provide really good graduates to our firms, foreign investors who are investing in Slovakia? Any recommendation from your side?
Yeah, I think it was also in your presentation, in your this research, that it is one of the biggest problems is how to match the output of today's education system and demand on the market, which means it is clear that in this area maybe it is possible to have some quick wins or quicker wins than in other areas. And then also to increase competition and motivation for quality at the higher education, which means at the university education. I consider one of the biggest problems of our the university level education very, very low quality and low competition and demand for quality. But if we are speaking about, which means my answer on your question for short-term perspective, especially matching these differences between supply and demand, especially on the third level education. But if question is what is fundamentally the most important, which will not bring quick results, but which can bring change, in my opinion, it is maybe one of the most important, because everything is important, is preschool education, which means kindergartens, which means to spend much more effort and to increase capacity for the preschool education, to have possibility to add for every child to attend these preschool institutions from free, at least 4 years of age. It seems to be that this is one of the biggest problem here in Slovakia. This is one of the reasons why we have this exclusion from the not only Roma children, but especially Roma children. And also, if we compare some international experience, it seems to be that this is one of the reasons, again, not only, but one of the reasons why Estonia is so successful in this area. As you know, Estonia is the world, one of the world champions. It is in the 6th, 8th place in the world by PISA, and one of the reasons is that they spend a lot of effort and changes in this preschool education. And simply, even if you are speaking about Estonia, Estonia is a good example not only for this. Estonia is a good example for all reform efforts, for all. And what I think is the biggest difference between Estonia and Slovakia is that in Estonia there is somehow they have some kind of national consensus about necessity to change themselves, to do reforms and improving of the system as permanent effort. That despite of changing of the government, more left, more central left, center right, this is some kind of common denominator which everybody is respecting and everybody is doing. And this could be a good example for us also how to even think about this, how to create some kind of general consensus, some kind of general understanding of necessity of this. And then, of course, it is connected also with the education, with all this what we are speaking about.
I fully agree with you, and many studies demonstrate that this is really the best value for money when you invest in preschool education. So I think also the value for money department, the Ministry of Finance should probably speak louder and push all the policymakers to execute serious reforms. We have some questions from the audience, namely from Dano Gaspar Krautberry. Mr. Mikloš, what do you see as absolutely necessary reforms to be done within a year in Slovakia to weather this storm with manageable downsides? What shall be the focus of our economy in the next decade, in your view?
I have mentioned these 4 areas, and again, I can only repeat, which means to do everything to have sound and sustainable public finance, improve business environment, improve and increase public service efficiency and public institutions, and then education, research, and knowledge economy. Of course, that it is, again, it is not, I think the main problem is not to have this as campaign, to do in first year, 2 years, and then nothing. It has to be kind of permanent effort that we will understand that, okay, this is only way. As much as possible in this area. And of course, political cycle exists, which means if there is something which is more sensitive, it is necessary to do first. For instance, these unpopular measures like to cancel ceiling for the pension age, right? It's necessary to do immediately and to say, okay, it is impossible to stay even in good times. Now we have crisis and so on. Which means to do as soon as possible these steps and these measures, which can be connected also with unpopular measures. Also, because then you can say that it is necessary step because we inherited this from the previous government, and also you can expect that for these kind of measures, you will have at the beginning of election term, you will have a strong enough majority in the parliament. Because what I'm afraid also is that in today's conditions, especially in such a not standard political parties, they can lose their majority. And if you see that if they want to change country, they will have to fight against very influential, very rich people who will be afraid from losing not only their money but also their freedom. Which means it will be really tough. And in my opinion, it is really important to focus in the first weeks and months for these measures, which are important for cleaning the system, for starting these systemic changes and reforms. It means I'm not speaking mainly about economic measures. I'm speaking about cleaning the system, because we know that one of the biggest problem, an obstacle, and one of the biggest reasons of incompetitiveness was this terrible situation in judiciary system, this terrible lack of rule of law, and so on, and corruption, which is connected with this. Which means, in my opinion, the program of the government is very good in this. I mean, in judiciary reform, in the rule of law, in fighting against corruption, this program is very, very, very good, very nice. But it is necessary to start as soon as possible to focus on this, and then to start these systemic reforms which I have mentioned.
I'm very happy to hear what you are saying because, as you probably know, this is one of the top priorities of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Slovakia, the Rule of Law Initiative. We've been saying this for more than 4 years already. Unfortunately, not many politicians really listen to us, but I think the times are changing, so I'm very happy that you also see it exactly the same way. I encourage our participants to ask a question directly, but in the meantime, we have a question from my colleague Michal Krčmery, who is asking something what you already mentioned, but nevertheless I repeat it, that we agree that an economic transformation of Slovakia is long overdue. Some politicians and interest groups, mostly labor unions, are pointing mostly to the threats of digital transformation, automatization, Industry 4.0, thus making it more difficult from political point of view to undertake necessary reforms. As a former politician, a member of the Slovak government, how would you advise current political leaders to communicate the necessary transformation without committing a political suicide? We live in a really social media world. How would you communicate this need for painful reforms? And I think you did it also in Ukraine. So what would be your advice to local politicians?
Yeah, it is difficult. It is everywhere. It is difficult. Even look at, as example, France. Yeah, Macron received strong mandate, and to do reforms even there is really, really difficult. But to be successful, which means it is risky, but there is no other way, because other way is only catastrophe for the country. To necessary precondition is very strong leadership, which means those leaders, politicians, have to have strong vision, will, and courage to do what is necessary to do. Only if you are deeply convinced inside, you can convincing others. Which means, and with this is connected also ownership of it, which means they have to do this not because pressure of the European Union or because pact of the Stability and Growth Pact is pushing us to decrease deficit, but it is necessary to be really convinced about the importance of this, to have strong leadership in this regard, then to communicate and to use every possible opportunity and means of communication. Which means now Prime Minister is very good in using social media for communication, and now situation really was changed in the comparison when we did the reforms, but communicate, not communicate. Go and fight in media, in TV debates with the populists, with those who brought country in today's difficult situation, and demask their populism, their irresponsibility, their corruption, and so on, so on. Which means only fight. But the most important, I mean, is that government has to have unity on this. You know, it was when we did these reforms during that government, when Slovakia was assessed as the most reformed country in the world, it was the good precondition was that we have been unified inside of the government. It was 4 center-right parties, and we agreed on the necessity of these reforms. And we had, of course, problems, tensions, fights, but on this we agreed. It was kind of consensus. Then you can, because if there is fight inside of the government, if to do this or not to do this is to be nicer or tougher, then it is. My advice could be to have kind of consensus on this, let's say, core of the necessary changes, necessary measures, And then to have strong leadership, ownership, and communication. To use any opportunity, because advantage of this government is, and this is important, advantage of this government is that opposition is very weak. You have Kotleba, which will be excluded from any further government, hopefully. And then you have Fico's party, which seems to be that will be either it will be changed on the leader or it will be divided. Which means opposition is very weak. It was not like when we did this reform, which opposition was strong. And if opposition is not alternative, then it is possible to do even more and to use effective communication to not allow opposition to grow in popularity and in influence.
Thank you. We are running out of time, so I would like to encourage anyone who is interested in addressing Mr. Mikloš directly can do it now. Please feel free. Maybe someone will come later. If you allow me, maybe one or two more questions in the meantime before we have any volunteer. I know that healthcare is really not something what is your strong suit. Of course, you know from the fiscal point of view how much it costs, but still, given the current crisis, do you think that the societies as such are going to change from these kind of economies which were in the recent years just-in-time economies? So everything which was produced, you didn't have high stock, and all these logistics work perfectly. Are we moving from just-in-time economy to just-in-case economy? So that means we will have to have bigger spare capacity for everything, and including healthcare. I mean, when you go back to 2008, and the lesson learned from the financial crisis is that simply banks had to increase their capital in order to be able to weather the next storm. Do we have to do the same, with the hospitals in Slovakia? Do we have to have more spare beds, spare vaccines, and even doctors? Or you think that it will not simply change that much, after the crisis?
Definitely, it will be necessary to, especially in these reserves for the case of next pandemic. It is clear now that this is nobody knows when, but sooner or later we can face another similar situation, which means all world, I think, learned that, because almost nobody was prepared, except Asian countries, which faced the SARS in 2003. Which is a good example that if countries had this kind of terrible experience, they learned and they had. Which means, yes, more serious is question, because if we are speaking about healthcare, about some stock of this equipment to face pandemic, that is clear. Speaking about beds and personnel, what we have shortage of nurses. In international comparisons, we don't have so big shortage of doctors, but nurses, yeah, there is shortage. It is again because it's also a question of the salaries, because they are simply not ready to work for this, and they're leaving to Austria and other countries. But more serious is question now about how it will change all economic system. And this you have mentioned that this will be maybe because even we have seen after a global financial crisis that until that time, until global financial crisis, international trade was growing quicker than GDP, and it was one of the driving force of the global growth. After global financial crisis, on the contrary, foreign trade grew up slower, and it was one of the reasons why global economic growth was smaller. Now we can expect that it will be even slower than before. And important is that trade is sharing almost 60% of global GDP, which means that one of the reasons why we have to, and also this debt crisis and what I've mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, what we can expect is that global growth and global model, I mean economic model, will be different as it was before. And again, if countries are bigger, they are less affected by this. But country like Slovakia, which is extremely open and extremely dependent on international trade, for us it could be another reason for difficulty which we can expect. And also this self-sufficiency, it is for the country, yes, surely in some respect it will be impossible, it will be important to think about, but I'm usually saying that in the world there are dozens of cities which are bigger by number of inhabitants as Slovakia is, which means to think that we can be self-sufficient is illusion.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wants to ask a question? We have a couple of really high-level, well-known people. Maybe you. We have even your former state secretary, Brane Jurajka, with us. Anyone wants to ask, or I still have some questions, and I don't know whether Mr. Mikloš, you have like 5 more minutes.
Just few minutes, because then I have crisis meeting at the Ministry of Economy.
Okay, so my question, I know, and it's a well-known fact that you are coming from Eastern Slovakia. So am I, and let's touch on the regional differences. One of the priorities of AmCham is also to work for supporting, Eastern Slovakia and Košice in particular. What do you think? Is the current crisis going to make these differences even bigger, or is not going to have an impact at all? And if yes, what should be done? And also, let's speak about a little bit of inequality within Slovakia. This inequality has been growing in recent years. Of course, the numbers are not so terrible like in other countries, but still, I think the current crisis can make these differences even bigger. So what should be the approach of the government? What should be done in terms of the regional differences and inequality within this country?
Again, I have to say that there are some special regional policy measures, like, for instance, to give incentives for new investment only if these companies are going there, to use more effectively European structural funds in this regard, and so on and so on. But again, the most important are the systemic reforms and conditions which will work for all the country. And then, of course, highway connection and all these issues. For Slovakia, in Slovakian case, could be the best incentive or method how to solve this problem could be integration of Ukraine. If Ukraine will enter European Union, then it could be, and if this border will not exist, that is a strong incentive for development of Eastern Slovakia. Of course, it is a question when it will be, but it is good also a reason to have clear in our foreign policy, because during last government this was also the problem. This kind of policy which was supporting more Russia than Ukraine came against our interest, against to most effective method how to solve also these regional discrepancies. Your question regarding what kind of consequences will have this crisis, I'm afraid that it will not help the decreasing of the inequality and these problems. But what we need, of course, is to create conditions that people will not leave from there, and that especially young, educated people will find perspective there. Because, and again, it is true for for all the world. The global competition is competition for only two items, investment and talents, which means what we need there, and this is the real solution, we need to create conditions where or when investment and talents will stay and will go and stay in these less developed regions. This is the only way how to solve this sustainable way.
Thank you very much for all your answers, all your observations. It was my pleasure, and I'm sure that also the pleasure of audience to listen to your experience and wisdom. I'm sure that we would be able to spend even a couple of hours more asking you questions, but I know that you have to leave. So once again, thank you very much for your patience, for your willingness to be with us, and I look forward to our future discussion. And also all the participants, I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and please stay with us also in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Mikloš.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.